right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Justine Marcus, the State and Local Policy Director with the Enterprise Community Partners team here in Northern California. And I'm really pleased to be kicking off our conversation today about our new report, which we are thrilled to be sharing with all of you. This is our 2026 Affordable Housing Pipeline Research. This is work that we've done the last couple of years, and we're excited to share our new findings from this year, as well as how we've really grown this research and the scope of our analysis for 2026. Before I hand it over to my colleague to talk about the findings, I just really wanted to, talk a little bit about why we do this pipeline research. We have seen over the last several years really meaningful gains in making it easier to build affordable housing. We've seen our developer partners, working so hard to get projects visioned and entitled and permitted and engaging local community. And what we hear time and time again is still that there are these kind of persistent roadblocks in the pipeline, especially around funding, that is standing in the way of affordable housing actually coming to completion, being built, and having the opportunity for folks to move in. And so our goal with this research is really to better understand what's happening with the pipeline, and as we'll talk about, what funding is needed in order to move these projects forward. So we're going to start with a discussion of the research, a bit about the methodology and our findings. After that, we will have some time for question and answer. Great time to ask, those nitty-gritty data questions that you have. We'll do our best to answer as many of those as we can in real time. And the ones that we don't have a chance to answer, we will follow up with folks offline. And then we'll use the second half of our time to have a discussion with a few of our fantastic panelists to talk about this data and really what it means for the sector and for the role of the state this coming legislative session. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Amiel, to introduce himself and to kick off the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Justine. Hey, everyone. Happy Friday Eve. My name is Emiliano Tanasio, Policy Program Manager with Enterprise NorCal here, working closely with Justine. Here to share with you all some of our findings from our most recent state pipeline report. As Justine mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section of the webinar, and we'll see what we can answer at the end of the presentation. So jumping right in here. So first, talking about what data is in the pipeline, the universe of properties that we're looking into, and some of those data sources. So first, the universe of projects in the final analysis of our pipeline research focuses on projects in the statewide pipeline as of the end of December 2025. That's about as recent of complete data as we were able to get before embarking on the analysis. And these projects in the pipeline are also focused on just the projects that apply to at least one state funding program, and these projects have not yet been awarded federal LIHTC, indicating that they still have some sort of funding need left in their capital stacks. And we are also focusing just on projects that are new construction, given that the lens that we're really trying to get at is the production pipeline across the state. And given that universe, you can kind of think of the pipeline as a bit of a snapshot or a point in time count of the state's pipeline. But we do want to note some data caveats in our research. The main thing is that the pipeline is likely an underestimate of developments awaiting funding to begin construction. Our data set that we assembled does not include all developments, especially those that do not seek state funding. Oftentimes, those projects are the ones that are often built by for-profit affordable housing developers. The other subset of projects that are not captured by our pipeline analysis are developments that have not applied for any state funding programs as well. So if, for example, a project has applied for MHP, but they were not awarded, we've at least captured that data point in that project, and that's included in our analysis. And to the right here, we do just have the list of state data sources that we've included. Again, tax credit application and award data, and a lot of the housing programs managed and administered by state HCD. So going over a little bit about the methodology, as a lot of folks probably know, a lot of these developments apply to multiple funding sources in order to meet their full funding need. So because of that, we do have to go through a fairly detailed and rigorous deduplication process. And we do identify these duplicates using project names, cross-reference for city, county, developer, and or the unit count if they are available. And as I mentioned before, developments that have received affordable housing tax credits and bonds were removed from the analysis, assuming that they no longer require any additional funding. And then in terms of the analysis itself, we do apply capital stack assumptions based on LIHTC funded projects from 2022 to 2025 that also received local and state subsidies. And again, I think this is maybe our fourth or fifth year doing the state pipeline research, and we've continued to try to refine our methodology given changes in the landscape across the state. So something we've refined in this round of the analysis is that developments that have not appeared in any funding round since 2021 are assumed to no longer be progressing. So we've omitted them from the analysis, kind of assuming that if they haven't sought additional funding in the past 4 years, there's a chance that they may no longer be financially feasible. The other piece that we added this year is adding affordable home ownership developments into our analysis, really trying to capture a bit more of a holistic picture of the state's pipeline. Even though a significant chunk of it is rental, we do have affordable home ownership units in the pipeline as well. So just giving a bit of an overview on affordable housing development for a little bit of level setting here. As you'll see on the right, we do have kind of a rough estimate of a typical funding capital stack or set of funding sources for an affordable housing development. And of course, it differs between affordable rentals and affordable home ownership as well. But what is fairly common is that regardless of tenure, affordable housing developments generally require multiple sources of funding to fully finance the construction of affordable homes. And these gap funding or subsidies are really crucial, and they can come from local, regional, and state programs. Oftentimes, they're the first set of funding committed to a development that then allows them to access or leverage additional financing, whether that be private dollars through philanthropy or a conventional mortgage, or sometimes in the case of affordable rentals, then going in for tax credits and bonds. So for this reason, subsidy or soft debt gap funding is really critical for these developments to move forward. And that's part of the motivations behind us in our research in terms of quantifying that funding need. And going over a little bit as well in terms of who lives in affordable housing, just to really maybe help ground that, especially when we're talking about different funding programs here and the needs. So who are we actually housing when we're talking about affordable housing? And we have a kind of high level example here, especially using Sacramento as an example. Um, Affordable housing in California really serves low income Californians defined by area median income, and that's also further disaggregated by household size as well, as you'll see in this table. So, um, for example, a K 12 teacher with a starting salary of $63,000. If they're a household of four, they would be considered, for example, very, very low income under these AMI charts. These are kind of the type of households we're really serving with these state investments. And these area median incomes, different programs sometimes also have different types of AMI requirements. And that's why going back to the funding capital stack in the previous slide, projects, especially serving the lowest income, sometimes often need additional operating subsidies, oftentimes from federal and state programs, just to help meet the funding need. So going over the findings itself from our research, what we found from our analysis is that as of the end of 2025, the state has almost 40,000 affordable homes in the pipeline awaiting funding to begin construction. And these homes are, we're investing in long-term infrastructure here, so they're going to be standing for quite some time. We estimate that over the next 55 years, these homes would serve an estimated 432,000 low-income households across California. And then again, digging into the funding need as well, we found that these 40,000 homes have an estimated state subsidy need of $2.3 billion for the whole pipeline. And paired with that, we also found an estimated $1.8 billion in state tax credit need for this pipeline as well. And putting a bit of a spotlight on home ownership here, given that it is a fairly new subset of properties that we've included in our analysis. We found that there's roughly 663 affordable home ownership units in the pipeline, which is fairly small in comparison to the bigger pot of units that's awaiting funding, but they are still very critical for our field and for the goals we're trying to meet for affordability in the state. These home ownership units have an estimated state subsidy need of about $100 million. And going into the role of state funding, again, as I mentioned in kind of the funding overview or affordable housing overview, state subsidy is really critical in terms of just helping move these affordable housing developments forward. And we also found that on average, when it comes to state subsidy, the state contributes an estimated $170,000 per unit for affordable rental homes. On the home ownership side of things, the average state contribution is about $143,000 per unit. So we wanted to highlight that just to really elevate that folks might be seeing significantly higher development costs per unit. I think for the whole state of California, our findings gave us about $680,000 per unit average for the state. Of course, there's variations for that. Depending on which region you are in California, it might be less in more rural regions or a little bit higher in some of the more urban centers in the state. But regardless, it just shows that the state is only really covering a portion of that total development cost per unit. And we've also found that around 2/3 of the homes in the pipeline have have already received funding from at least one state program. So there's already been significant state investments in these properties, and we're just hoping that, the with additional funding, these state investments are just not sitting there and lingering in these projects as they await for additional funding to begin construction. Um, and we have the leverage factor here of about 1 to 4, meaning that for every dollar that the state invests in these properties, um, these developments are able to leverage an additional almost $4 in federal, private, and local funds to help complete their capital stacks. And based on that, we estimate that without the needed state subsidy of a little over $2 billion that we mentioned earlier, California could lose out on an estimated $7.7 billion in local, federal, and private dollars. So we definitely don't want to leave any of those additional dollars on the table, and that further highlights the need for state subsidy again. And also wanted to highlight here the estimated tax exempt bond needed for the pipeline. As folks know, there's been federal reform that was passed last year on lowering the bond threshold for 4% tax credits. That's something we've already accounted for in this analysis as well, and hoping that with that lower bond threshold, we now have more bonds to go around to fund these projects, but again, still needing these state subsidies to kind of get these projects farther along where they can then go in for tax credits and bonds. And then lastly, as folks might have seen in the brief, we do go over 4 actions to unlock and scale the pipeline. First being very critical, investing in urgent state funding through the 2026-27 budget. Next is passing the 2026 Affordable Housing Bond Act and ideally paving the way for a more permanent source of funding. And then third, streamlining the housing finance system and improving cost efficiency. And then lastly, confronting operational challenges faced by these affordable housing developments, whether that's as they're planning these developments or once they're completed as well. And these 4 actions, it's something that our panelists will touch on in the next section. But other than that, I think we should have a bit more time for a bit more Q&A. So thank you all for tuning into the overview of our data. We'll drop a link to our latest state pipeline brief in the chat, and happy to answer more questions.
Thanks so much, Amiel. And I have a few questions that folks have chatted to me, but I would encourage others to, add more to the chat or to the Q&A, and we can line them up. Do you want to maybe pull down the slides, Amiel, and we can let folks see you as we answer these questions. So the first question I have is, in your analysis, how do you account for projects that apply to the state for funding multiple times and the projects might evolve and change over time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that's really where our deduplication process comes in. As I mentioned earlier, we do try to match up these projects across different programs and over time, knowing that they're applying again and again until they receive the funding they need. But to account for some of the changes of the scope, that's something we definitely take consideration. Once we've identified the duplicates, we try to keep the data from the most recent application. So for example, if a project applied for the multifamily Supernova round 1, but they also applied for the Supernova round 3, then we're at least matching those up, but keeping the most up-to-date financial information and unit counts from the most recent NOFA they applied to. So in that example, it would be the details from Supernova Round 3.
Great. Next question I have is how, quote, ready are these projects if funding were available?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these projects are already entitled. They really just need um, this last push of funding to be able to break ground. So ideally, if we had a windfall of a couple $1 billion to clear out this bottleneck of funding, ideally these projects should be able to just go ahead and start breaking ground. And I think that's part of why we also mentioned um, a permanent source of funding as part of our actions for not just unlocking the pipeline, but scaling the pipeline as well, just to really avoid any bottlenecks in the pipeline for the state.
Great. The next question I have is, are there any geographic patterns in the data? Are there projects in all different parts of the state?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think especially with the expansion of tax credits from the fall and the lowering of the bond threshold, round three alone for 4% tax credits saw a significantly higher number of projects apply. So from that and the history of different NOFAs from the state, we have seen um, most counties in the state have projects in their pipeline. There might just be a handful of some of the more rural counties where they might not necessarily have one, or maybe they just might have one or two. But for the most part, most of the state is fairly represented, which is hopefully a trend that we'll see a bit more in this coming year with this expansion of tax credits.
Hey, that's a great transition. The last question that I did have was, what is the effect of the federal LIHTC changes on the pipeline?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely the shift in the universe of properties that I saw, even just between 4% round two and round three, which is kind of when those changes took effect. We've definitely seen a higher number of tax credit applications and also tax credit awards between round two and round three. Um, I think I think that's something that it's a bit hard to speculate for now because, as I tried to emphasize earlier, there is still some of that state subsidy need for some of these projects. So, you know, it's great that there's been more tax credits available, bonds available, but as we saw in the research, there's still quite a bit of units that are still not ready to go in for tax credits yet. They still need to fill in their subsidy gaps. And again, further highlighting the need for that $2.3 billion in state subsidy. I think I think the other piece that might come into play is, as I mentioned, part of the subset of developments that we don't really capture as well in this pipeline research is the subset of affordable housing developments that don't seek state subsidy. Oftentimes, again, those are projects that are built by for-profit developers. So what you might see in those capital stacks is a project will just have some sort of conventional debt or equity from the developer and then just going straight for tax credits. So that means that for those types of projects, they would just have a bit more room to play with in terms of this new environment for tax credits. But again, for projects that do require and seek state subsidy, oftentimes those are the projects that are really serving some of the lower income households just because they do need a bit more financial support to make the project financially feasible, then again, there's still kind of that hump they have to get through with state subsidy.
Thanks, Emil. I got one more question and then we'll transition to our panel, which is what is something that you would have liked to capture in the pipeline but couldn't because of data constraints or limitations?
That's a good question. I think more information on population served. I think it's something that I think just from a research perspective would be interesting to look at and see and disaggregate. The data is fairly spotty, so we don't always have that piece of intel. And again, these projects, the scope sometimes changes frequently, but it'd be helpful to see like how many units are meant to serve people experiencing homelessness, for example, or how many of these projects are meant to serve seniors, or how many are meant to serve large families, which is also kind of a growing need, especially for affordable housing. So I think bringing it back to kind of who we're serving and who lives in affordable housing, I think some of that granularity is a bit harder to capture sometimes.
Thanks so much, Amiel, and I appreciate you letting everyone put you on the hot seat. We're going to now turn to our panel. We have three wonderful folks who've joined us today. What maybe I'll do is just allow everyone to introduce themselves first before we dive into the questions. So I'm going to go to Natalie and then Zeke and then Araceli.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you today. I'm Natalie Spivak, and I'm the Senior Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Manager at Housing California. And for those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit statewide organization focused on increasing the supply of affordable homes, ending homelessness, and protecting renters.
Hey everyone, thank you so much to Enterprise for having me and for doing this research. My name is Zeke Sandoval. I am the Associate Director of Policy for PATH. We are a homeless services provider and affordable housing developer operating across the state in four major regions, including Santa Clara County, Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego.
Hi, everyone. My name is Araceli Palafox, and I'm the Associate Director of Policy for Enterprise's Southern California market. And I get to work with the wonderful folks on the call here and my colleagues, Justine and Amiel, on the Enterprise team.
Well, I'm excited that we have the three of you here to have a conversation. The data itself is always really compelling, but I think we always then want to go to, what does this really mean on the ground and what are the implications for decision makers and for folks in our sector? So I want to start with one of the major points of this research, which is really the funding. So, as is discussed in the research, there is a significant funding need. And we can see that, in the numbers, but I want to hear a little bit, and I think I'll start with you, Zeke, just about, as a developer working on the ground, what does the current funding environment or, the deficit of funding that's needed, how does that affect your work as a developer? How does it affect your own pipeline of projects and how you all are planning to meet the needs of the residents that you serve?
Thank you, Justine. It is the biggest structural barrier that we're facing at this point. So just as a point of context, and I'm sure some of this was captured in Enterprise's report, we have at Path five projects, five supportive housing and affordable housing communities that are on the other side of the funding equation that have all their funding, but have not yet begun full construction because of how long it took us to get that funding. And then we have another four communities, which includes multiple buildings, that are still in the process of getting their funding. And so, all told, that is upwards of 500 affordable and supportive units that could have been online. There's no engineering reasons, there's no legal reasons that couldn't have happened. And the legislature should absolutely be patting themselves on the back for removing so many of those legal barriers. That is huge. But we are now faced with the biggest one, which is we simply do not have the money to move these forward. And I just want to be really clear about what that means. There are tens of thousands of people outside right now. It is upwards of 90 degrees in Southern California. We have the entitlements and approvals. We've got the legal go ahead. We are not getting held up by the same kind of NIMBY meetings that 10 years ago would have stymied these projects. We don't have the funding. And I definitely want everyone to think about the person that you saw today as you were headed to work, picking up the kids, getting your coffee. Think about them in that heat. Think about the barriers. Think about what they're carrying on their shoulders right now. We as a state are collectively asking that person to wait until each entity, whether it's a state agency, a local agency, a federal agency, gets to put in a little bit of a chunk. Not everything, but just a little bit, and then wait several years for someone else to pick up the balance. That's who this burden is falling on.
Thank you, Zeke, and I really appreciate you bringing it back to, who we're building housing for, right? And what this means on the personal level. So I really appreciate that. And I want to just ask you to speak a little bit more about one of the things you kind of brushed on, which was just everything that goes into the project before you're going to the state for funding. For those who are less familiar, like what does it look like in that time leading up to when you submit that application to the state? What all has been done before you get to that point?
An enormous amount, right? We have to go to the local permitting entity and say, pull the entitlements, pull the planning. We are talking about an enormous upfront investment that usually we carry out debt for to make sure that we have all the architecture plans, all the engineering plans, everything buttoned up, right? This is not a idea on a whiteboard that we're coming up and asking for seed funding for. This is we are ready to go. We have done the budgeting. And in many cases, we're doing the budgeting around the extremely complex labyrinthine process that it is to actually get the money. And with the expectation that we're going to have to tilt those estimates up sometimes 5, 10, 15, 20% because of the length of time that it will take. One thing I will say that is extremely frustrating, not just to us, but to neighbors as well. We don't come in with the full expectation of the population that we're going to be able to serve because that still hinges very cleanly on the funding. So if any of you have not had the experience of going to a community meeting, not because we have to, but because we want to, we feel like it's the responsible thing to do, and telling someone, we definitely know that there will be some people living here. We don't know exactly what they will have experienced before they get here. Now, obviously, we all know we're going to have the services, and that's something we can touch on later on too. But it is a frustrating paradox, a limbo that we are in for 4 to 5 years on average, longer if we're unlucky, to actually get the funding that we need to make do on the commitments that we made to the locality that we were in, the neighbors that were in, the folks that we have subcontracted to do the work. It is a long, long process. I have seen many projects go through multiple different project managers because of the length of time and because of the just intense burden that we're putting on our teams who they want to build affordable housing. They could have gone and made a ton of money making for-profit housing. They decided not to. But we are taking up the time that they could be building a lot of units with essentially a highbrow version of just waiting for someone to fund us.
Thanks, Zeke. I want to turn it to you, Natalie. If there's more you want to add, I know that Housing California's membership is, developers across the state, and I'm curious from your kind of across the state perspective, what you're seeing in terms of the lack of funding and how that's affecting the pipeline writ large.
Yeah, I think Zeke said it really well, just to put a very fine point on what he said. In affordable housing development, time is money. And so the longer that projects wait for funding, the more expensive they're going to get because during that pre-development period that Zeke was just talking about, you're paying landholding costs, you're paying lawyers, you're paying contractors. And if there is a limited amount of funding in the system, well, A, you might not acquire a property at all that could be fabulous for affordable housing because you just don't think that you're going to have a shot at winning limited funding. Or, and a lot of developers do this because they, really believe in their projects. They acquire the site and then they compete for limited funding either at the State Housing and Community Development Department or at the Tax Credit Allocation Committee or Debt Limit Allocation Committee. And because the funding pot is so small, they have to apply over and over again to win. And so you could apply to the same funding source, two, three times before winning it. And then you have to go get your tax credits and bonds and do the same thing again. And during that time, projects get more expensive. And when projects get more expensive, it also means that the limited state funding we have doesn't go as far, and we can't fund as many projects with what we do have.
Thanks, Natalie. We have we've been talking about the importance of funding, and part of what we haven't really discussed directly is what is the current state of funding in the state of California. So I want to maybe take us back to basics a little bit on that, and I'll have you maybe start us off here, Araceli, but just, talk us through the current landscape of funding at the state level, what is available right now, what has been made available in the past, and kind of what we see looking forward.
Yeah, thanks, Justine. So, I think the pipeline report reminds us that is a helpful reminder and does a really good job at like laying out that state funding is incredibly critical for the production of affordable housing in California. As Amiel pointed out, in his presentation, the state subsidy is really what allows developers to do that leveraging for other funding sources. And despite the progress, there's still, we see a great need and opportunity in the pipeline. And yet there's still, no ongoing funding source for affordable housing. And so what we are left with and what we rely on is really the budget and the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, which is really the state's only large source of stable ongoing funding for affordable housing. And so then year after year, we advocate for investments from the state budget to get funding for those critical housing and homelessness programs. And I think, folks know that there was no new funding in the governor's January budget proposal for housing and homelessness programs, which makes our advocacy work around the budget and the state housing bond, which I know Natalie's going to talk about, that much more critical and important for ensuring that these units in the pipeline get the funding that they need.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so the two things that Araceli just mentioned, the budget and the bond are the two key things that affordable housing advocates are focused on this year because the upper limit of the number of units we can build in California is the amount of funding in the system. And I just really want to emphasize, since you all have probably hopefully heard about the key set of programs that we're pushing for in the budget, which touch affordable housing production, preservation, home ownership, and homelessness, kind of that full spectrum of housing interventions. And also, I'm sure you've heard about the two $10 billion affordable housing bonds, the WICS bond in the Assembly and the Cabalden bond in the Senate. We very much see those two as complements and not substitutes because even together, all of that funding wouldn't be sufficient to meet the demand that we have in the state for affordable housing. And also, the bond, if it's passed by the voters in November, the money won't be available until early 2028, which means that if we don't fund programs in the budget this year, there is a gap. And going back to the implications for the state, for the state pipeline, a gap is a really big problem because that means that for a full year, projects languish and get more expensive before they're finally able to be awarded and get over the finish line. And is also another year that low-income Californians are waiting for homes. And then also just want to underscore this is such a massive opportunity to be investing in the pipeline in a way that really is unprecedented with the federal tax credit changes that Amiel talked about. we have the opportunity to be funding double the number of affordable homes each year than we funded in years past. And especially in a budget deficit, taking advantage of federal dollars should be an even more attractive option for the state. And so by investing in these critical programs, the multifamily housing program is our state's flagship program. The other programs at HCD, like the Cerna Farm Worker program, we are then able to leverage more federal funding and essentially make our dollar at the state level go further.
Thank you both for that. One of the things that we didn't discuss detailed data on, but is a part of the research brief that is really important, is kind of a larger contextual challenge for affordable housing right now, which is we definitely are needing to get projects built. But once projects are built, and even just new projects, when they're putting together what their financial package is going to be, they are dealing with a pretty challenging environment for like rising operational costs and volatility within their operational costs, things like insurance, utilities, right? And so I did want to talk a little bit about that because it is about the kind of long-term viability of the pipeline. So I'd love to maybe turn it to you, Araceli, to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, this is a equally part of the kind of multi-pronged approach that we took in the pipeline report, addressing the operational challenges that are impacting affordable housing providers is also, as critical as advancing the efforts on the bond and the budget. And, I think we at Enterprise, have heard many of our partners express experiencing financial distress across their portfolios due to the things that you've mentioned, just seeing like vacancies, experiencing increases in their operating costs, specifically around insurance, but really just like the overall lack of sufficient funding to address their operational needs, and in some cases, their physical needs. So, in the brief, we talk about it a little bit more, but want to just kind of uplift one of the areas that we're seeing is really around the issue of rising insurance costs. We at Enterprise have been organizing around this issue alongside partners like Housing California and others in this space for a couple of years now, really in response to hearing from partners report spikes in their insurance expenses being dropped by their carriers and really just facing limited insurance availability in the market. And we know that because, mission-driven affordable housing providers can't simply raise their rents and already operate on really thin margins, they really are left with like limited options to cope with what they're experiencing. And so what this has done is put really tremendous strain on the providers and their portfolios. And, what I want to just kind of call out what this means is that we're putting at risk affordable housing properties across the state and the households who call those units home. And so this really becomes a core priority for us and many of our partners, and supporting the sustainability of affordable housing properties across the state is a core part of the recommendations in the report, along with the other areas that we've talked about.
Thanks, Araceli. And I do just want to spend a little bit more time on these operational challenges. And I'm wondering, Zeke, if you'd be able to chime in with a little bit of the, specific on the ground perspective that you're seeing as especially a provider of permanent supportive housing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we're in an environment right now where the concept of permanent supportive housing is under attack by folks on the other side of the country, largely speaking. So I think it's worth returning to the basics, right? When we say housing first doesn't mean housing only, we're talking about PSH, right? We're talking about permanent supportive housing. We are saying when you move in, it is not just here's your keys, best of luck. It is welcome home. Let's figure out what the rest of your life looks like. Because of how funding for supportive housing is allocated and the requirements contingent on it, almost all PSH is reserved for folks who have been chronically homeless. So the legal definition of that means homeless for a year or more. And in most instances, especially in big urban areas where unsheltered homelessness has been a longstanding issue, we're not just talking about 1 year, we're usually talking about 5 or more years. And the impact that that takes on your body and mind is incalculable. And so the amount of work on the services side of things that has to go into helping someone adapt to this next stage of their life can be and often is enormous, right? We are talking about the simple things of here's how to go to a grocery store, here's how to use a phone, here's how to use a computer and navigate the complex Byzantine structures of getting your benefits. And also, what does the recovery look like from addiction? What does the very challenging work of dealing with a serious mental illness, or even just your, I hate to say run of the mill, but in the case of folks experiencing homelessness, you're going to have some level of PTSD and depression coming out of that 99 times out of 100. So dealing with that, dealing with feeling like you are worth something again, that is an enormous amount of work. And when the state is as inconsistent as it is, and the federal government is as inconsistent as it is about funding the level of services, and by funding services, I think we should clarify, we're talking about paying real people who have dedicated their lives to being caseworkers for people experiencing homelessness. If we can't pay those people consistently year over year and have a plan for career mobility, for benefits, for safety and support and protections from burnout, then we are not going to succeed. And PSH can run a real risk of entering a downward spiral where the worse it gets, right? Let's say we're not funding the right amount of caseloads, and the staff that are there start getting burnt out, and then more people go without seeing their case manager, and then they start acting out. Somehow the environment gets worse, whether it's someone acting up or causing damage to the units. The longer that goes on, the less habitable the building is, the fewer subsidies you can pull from it, and then the fewer dollars that you have available as the property owner to invest in maintenance, to invest in operating costs, depending on the structure of the organization, to invest in staff and in people. So you can really start a doom spiral, similar to what I see in like a high risk health insurance pool or even any kind of insurance pool, where you're not able to get out as a PSH owner and operator, you're not able to get out from underwater. And the only way that we prevent against that is by consistency, and funding the programs at the state level that pay social workers and pay clinicians to keep doing their jobs and to do them well and to do them in a way that they feel fulfilled and rewarded and like they have a future in the work. Until we do that, the operational challenges are only going to worsen because of the continuing advanced need.
Thanks, Zeke. I know this isn't always, the easiest topic to talk about, and I really appreciate how you laid it out and, offering, what is the way we need to approach it, right? There are best practices and there are ways that we know that we can set properties and residents up for success. We've talked a lot about need. We've talked about funding need. We've talked about challenges. Now I want to talk about opportunity and kind of wrap out our discussion on that note. So I want to start with one of the big points of discussion these days across the state and in Sacramento, which is the new California Housing and Homelessness Agency and the new kind of committee that will be distributing affordable housing development financing. I'm curious for you all what you see as the opportunities for the pipeline, for some of the other topics we've talked about today of this new agency. There's obviously a lot that is yet to be known about how it will work and how everything will function. And so now is a great time to think about what we hope we will see. What is that opportunity? And I'll start with you, Natalie.
Thanks, Justine. Yes, this has been something that Housing California has been really closely watching and engaging in, and that we see as a really big opportunity to get some wins that our sector has long been chasing after. So, we've talked a lot about funding thus far, and two other legs that we also need to simultaneously be paying really close attention to is how do we bring down cost? So, how do we use the dollars that we have more efficiently? And also, how do we use our dollars most effectively and make sure that we're getting the outcomes from the system that we intend to see? And I think that the new California Housing and Homelessness Agency really stands to help us on those last two pieces, bringing down cost and increasing the effectiveness of our programs. So for anyone who's less familiar, this will be starting on July 1st, the first time that the state has an agency dedicated specifically to housing and homelessness. Before, those issues were part of a broader agency that also focused on consumer services. And one of the main and first charges of the new agency is to create a one-stop shop for state gap financing resources. So programs like the Multifamily Housing Program, Joe Cerna, Infill Infrastructure Grant Program, and also the sources of funding at the California Housing Finance Agency, like the Mixed Income Program. So theoretically, you'd be able to apply to the new agency and get all of your state gap financing resources at once rather than applying multiple times to piece those sources together. And this is really important because, just to put some finer numbers on it, a Turner Center report found that each additional source of public funding that you add to a project adds $20,000 per unit. So really stands to provide substantial cost reductions. As Justine said, we don't know the final details of what that streamlined funding system will look like. And that's something that we're watching and engaging in really closely, but see as a big opportunity. And then I also want to touch on the opportunities on the homelessness side, which are, Zeke especially just talked a lot about the importance of services funding and the certainty that you will be able to provide a high level of services along with the dollars you receive to build the physical unit. And right now at the state level, there isn't any coordination between the capital award you get, so the dollars you need to build the physical building, and the supportive services dollars. And so we, in the creation of this new agency, are really thinking about what could it look like to better integrate capital and services awards at the state level. So there are many other opportunities, I think, but those are the two that I would highlight.
Thanks, Natalie. Araceli or Zeke, is there anything more you'd like to add on this opportunity we have with the new agency?
Yeah, I mean, I think, plus one to all that Natalie said, I think in addition to, more effective and efficient systems, I think we really see an opportunity to support portfolios more holistically at at all steps of the process. And so, particularly given our discussion around, the operational challenges, we are excited about the opportunity to explore what it looks like to provide more, long-term support on that center's portfolio health. And so this could be something that we could explore as part of a better system that is addressing all these various pieces that we're discussing.
Thank you. We are rapidly nearing the end of our time, so I want to just do a bit of a rapid fire to all three of you. We've talked about a lot today. There's a lot of juicy stuff in the data. What is your big takeaway that you'd want folks tuning in to leave with top of mind? And I am going to go reverse alphabetical. I'm going to go Zeke, then Natalie, then Araceli.
That's like the opposite of elementary school. Thanks, Justine. I think the biggest thing that I really want folks to take away is there's a temptation from every public entity, local, state, some instances federal, to maximize the amount of units that you can claim credit for, right? To say, well, we put in 10% of the total development cost And therefore, we get to kind of claim 100% of the unit when we send out press releases and when we talk about the program to voters. I am beginning to feel, and talking with just your everyday person who is extremely frustrated by the crisis of homelessness, by the crisis of housing affordability, that that is the wrong way to be thinking about this. Folks are going to feel, the general public who does not read press releases and probably doesn't even read news articles about this kind of thing, is going to feel very dejected and like their money is not being spent well when there are a lot of projects that haven't broken ground. They're going to feel better when more buildings are going up. So every time that an entity decides, well, we're going to fund 15% instead of 50%, and then someone else has to wait to pick up the other 85%, then that is going to create this perception of money for nothing because it is going to take several years for that money to come to fruition. So I'm really hoping that folks can start to reverse the polarity of how they're thinking about this stuff politically, because I think we're thinking about this all wrong.
Natalie, next up.
Technically, I should have been first, SP versus SA, but I'll forgive you.
I was doing first names.
Sorry. Okay, I take it all back. Okay, so uh, beyond the very obvious of we need the bond this year and we need funding in the budget this year, I actually want to continue with what Zeke said. I think we really, by not investing in affordable housing and homelessness, we risk perpetuating a negative cycle of lack of investment and loss of voter trust that government can solve this crisis. Because when we don't invest, the problem gets worse. When the problem gets worse, street homelessness goes up, for example. It looks like government isn't doing its job and people lose faith that the government can and then don't want to empower government with the resources it needs to fix the problem. So we really need to continue to invest, and our programs work. They do. Every dollar we put in leads to more affordable housing being built and leads to fewer people falling into homelessness on the front end. And so it just really is important that we, even in a deficit year, continue to beat the drum that we can't take a year off of funding these programs.
Yeah, those were both really good. And I know we only have a minute, so I'll be super quick. I think I always just come back to the fact that we need a permanent source of funding for affordable housing every time we have this conversation. Otherwise, we'll be here next year talking about the budget, right? And so, I think that, but also I think what I hope folks walk away with is that there are actions we can take to get closer to the goal, which you see in the report and you heard from the folks on the call. So thanks.
I love that. As an ending note, there is a big opportunity here, and we appreciate everyone tuning in to think about it with us. We will be sending some follow-up information to everyone who registered, and that will also have all of our contact information if you have additional questions. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Bye-bye.